For the longest time, weeks and days before 12 minutes was gonna launch, I've been thinking of how to cover this game on this channel. Should I do a spoilers discussion review or a full-on analysis on the game? That question soon dissipated after finishing 12 minutes in the afternoon. I just didn't feel like covering it. To be concise, I didn't like 12 minutes at all. Treat this video as a very long rant and a very negative review on one of the most anticipated indie games. This video will be full of spoilers from here on out, so be warned. Okay, so in 12 minutes, you play as a man coming back to your apartment from a long day at work. The main premise is that the 10 minutes after you enter the apartment will keep looping over and over again every time you die or when you step outside your apartment. This 10 minutes period is thus where the bulk of the gameplay lies, with the key driving event taking place at the 5-minute mark, where a rogue and violent cop will invade your house, accusing your lovely wife of murder and eventually killing both of you. This setup and premise is extremely intriguing. So intriguing to a point where many players, including me, felt compelled to play on launch day. And throughout the first few loops, it lived up to the expectations. Navigating the apartment, interacting with different objects and dialogue choices, it all felt pretty fresh and new. I remember these times to be quite fun, just experimenting and just overall goofing around all over the place. It's also during these first few loops that we learn some of the plot's early setups, like the wife being pregnant and potentially being a murderer. In the middle loops is where my attention and patience started to wane. Aside from being able to successfully carry out a plan and finding a solution, the whole pacing felt very tedious and uninteresting. I'll cover more about the repetitive and tedious nature of the game in the gameplay section. Anyways, another reason why these middle loops felt so tedious has to do with the writing. By these few loops, I've kind of gotten too used to hearing the same lines over and over again. It gets to a point where you just kind of get tired of hearing them. This reminds me of games like the Stanley Parable, where part of the gameplay loop is restarting the same level again and again, but making different decisions each time. The narrator in the game often mixes out the dialogue throughout the game, so it never ever feels stale. And also the voice performance and writing in Stanley Parable is much better compared to this game.
I was in the middle of something. Do you have zero consideration for others? Are you that convinced that I want something bad to happen to you?
Of course, the two games are very different in tone, gameplay and almost everything, but I wonder if having different dialogues at the start would make these middle loops much more tolerable. Speaking of dialogues, when I was first playing through these parts of the game, I felt that the writing and characterization was very bad, especially the interactions with your wife. For example, after getting murdered by the cop a few times now, you're desperately trying to convince your wife to take specific actions like leaving the apartment, and then her reply to your panicked comments is, "Are you that scared of my cooking?" or any other flirtatious answer. Her responses are just so damn weird when I first played the game. I was thinking there was no way any human would ever say these lines. In order for me to fully talk about the characterization of these characters, I would need to first explain the overall plot and endings. So here's a summary of the plot. Number 1. Your wife is being accused of killing her dad by the cop. Number 2. You confronted your wife with a pocket watch. She admits to killing her dad on Christmas Eve. Number 3. You realize that your wife is innocent because she has an alibi on New Year's Eve, which was actually the day he died. Number 4. Both of you guys managed to talk to the cop peacefully and also managed to prove that your wife is innocent. We then get the information that before her dad died, he kept muttering the word monster, monster, implying his murderer is the monster, which turns out to be the term that was used for the nanny's affair son, which is your wife's half-brother. Number 5, we get the information that the name of the nanny is something flowery. Number 6, the main protagonist find out he is the monster, since his mother's name is Dahlia. Number 7, we get the flashback scene showing the protagonist killing his father, and then we get the different endings. Okay, so let me just address the main plot up to the ending. In my opinion, I think it's very bad. Bad in the sense of pacing, and bad in the sense of the story beats itself and the twists. Okay, so let me first explain about the pacing. A lot of the quote-unquote big revelations take place shortly right after one another. There was no time for the twist to really set in at all, you just go straight from one twist to the next. And the worst part is, in these loops, you'll just be repeating the exact same steps, except for one minute dialogue or gameplay change. So from a gameplay perspective, you're basically doing nothing new. I would say I'm partly to blame for the pacing feeling bad, because in my own personal playthrough, I did a whole interrogating and torturing scene with the cop before the closet scene. So I basically skipped the moment where my wife confessed and I believed in her, since I already know her dad was shot twice and on New Year's. So when I investigated the Polaroid, the revelation that she didn't kill her dad was almost immediate. But in my defense, the pacing from where we talk to the cop peacefully to the incest arc is still way too fast. There's literally no time for any of these twists to resolve. And in addition, once you find out that you are the monster, the pacing just tanks. I remember spending up to 15 minutes trying to confess the whole situation, hoping the game would just reach its ending and roll credits. In the end, it's not even an ending. I had to search up Polygon's walkthrough of the game to finally end the game. On the merit of the plot and twist itself, it is just bad. For instance, let's talk about the mystery of finding out who's the killer of the dead. When your wife confesses, she immediately talks about the Polaroid on the fridge, the same quote-unquote evidence that will prove her innocent. It's just way too on the nose about it, and this design philosophy will continue past at least 2 more times with the only people I have to listen to are my mother and my daughter, and the something flowery comment. The whole mystery and experimentation of the first half of the game is not even present anymore. We're just getting string along each loop and twist with no thought process required. Nor are there any significant resolution to each of the major plot points, resulting in an extremely simplistic murder mystery story. And the main incest twist is executed very badly. The whole protagonist turning out to be someone you never expected is an absolute cliche at this point. There's so many examples of a protagonist subverting your expectations in video games, especially in mystery games in particular. So when I got to the big moment where it's revealed that we are the monster, I just couldn't stop laughing at how bad the twist is. I'll admit it's a little bit immature in retrospect, but I really couldn't take a game seriously anymore from that point. Especially since the game up to this point seems like it's trying to tell a very grand, epic, serious mystery story. But the execution here just felt so flat. This twist just doesn't feel earned at all, it felt completely out of place from everything that's established up to this point. Speaking of being completely out of place from everything that's established, let's finally talk about the ending. Because of the fact that this game utilizes a very unclear ending structure, the next few minutes will only highlight my interpretation of the ending, so please don't take it as gospel. Okay, so first thing first, the main 10 minutes loop that we have played so far is not real, it's all in your head. So the cop, not real, the pregnant wife, not real, the apartment, not real. The time loop we are experiencing is merely a projection of the future, specifically 8 years away into the future. In order to snap out of this dream state, you need to use the pocket watch to rewind time, which will lead you to the brighter study room with the dead. This is also the scene where the missing 2 minutes lie. For all intents and purposes, let's call this scene here the real scene. This real scene depicts a younger main protagonist and his dad, just like the flashback scene we encountered before. The key difference is that through this real scene, you can get access to different dialogue options which will lead to different endings. I will not be highlighting the different endings in detail because they are all bad, and it's really the information that you can get through these endings that is important, especially when you want to understand the full picture of 12 minutes. So here are the important information pertaining to this real scene. A. The main protagonist and his sister already know each other and they are very close. This can be seen from the Alone ending, where the main protagonist say there's a world where I live and where she doesn't get to know why, as well as the flavor text provided by the father figure afterwards, suggesting a close relationship between the two. B. The sister is already pregnant. This can be seen from the dialogue if you choose the I want to be with her option, where the dad remarks that the main protagonist got the sister pregnant, and his reply was to keep the child. This suggests the sister is already pregnant in this real scene. C. It's alluded that the time loop was a figment of the imagination of the main protagonist that is physically in this real scene. This can be seen from the first dialogue where the dad welcomes the protagonist back to this real scene. It also explains some of the inconsistency, like how the dad in this real scene could have found out his daughter being pregnant 8 years in the future. This fact should help us understand the 3 main endings one can acquire in this game. Firstly, the Alone ending is one where you choose to leave the sister behind in the real scene, without giving any explanation nor closure to her. One where the main protagonist just disappears. After the credits, the protagonist is seen entering an empty apartment devoid of any furniture. Key thing to note is that the main protagonist is in his work attire and is a full-blown adult at this point. The most widely accepted theory is that the empty apartment is a metaphor. After leaving her 8 years ago, he still wasn't able to truly get over her, and he will always have this void in his heart. Which kind of makes sense since we are leaving a girl alone after she's pregnant. It's kind of a dick move, but yeah, it's a pretty unsatisfying ending. The second ending is one where we recite a dumb meditation quote back at the dad in the real scene, where the dad will go on to hypnotize the protagonist, making him forget about everything about his sister. The intended effect is of course for the protagonist to get over her and move on with his life without ever interacting with her again. This will solve the void in his heart problem highlighted in the Alone ending. One thing to note though, despite the protagonist forgetting everything about the sister, it doesn't retroactively negate the sex between them, so she's still pregnant with the incest baby in this real scene. Now the final third ending, the mindfulness ending. This is activated when you recite the pretentious quote again and you click the clock in the study room. Suddenly the room you are in, the real scene is gone. Remember when I told you that for all intents and purposes, let's call this the real scene? But actually this real scene is not even real. All of this is just an imagination. This includes the real scene. This is not a it's just a dream ending. It's a dream within a dream ending. And this can be seen from the final dialogue, where there are multiple lines alluding to the fact that this is all just one big imagination conjured up in the protagonist's mind. There's also a stark and distinct tonal change in William Dafoe's dialogue that suggests a change in scene.
You do have a remarkable imagination, the stories you've created. But
if you still don't believe in this, look at this particular phrase in the dialogue. You can't keep obsessing over her. When you obsess over someone unhealthily, it's usually one-sided in nature. Just like when you obsess over a K-pop group, for instance, and your mom is like, hey, you need to stop obsessing over Jimin, it's not healthy, etc. This is clearly a contradiction to the real scene, where we have already established the pair knew each other very well and were in an intimate relationship. That's why choosing to leave her in the alone ending is such a difficult choice. We should make the choice of words very strange here in the mindfulness ending. If this part of the real scene is a contradiction, it will mean the same for the other facts as well. And that in a nutshell is the therapy theory, where in this mindfulness ending, none of the things I mentioned actually happen. The protagonist seeks professional help due to his feelings he felt about his sister before anything actually happened. In this timeline, the protagonist hasn't done anything to his sister. His sister probably doesn't even know he existed, so there's no incest baby or anything like that. Also in this timeline, the William Dafoe guy might not even be your dad, since where is it ever so convenient to have a therapist for a dad? This is widely accepted as a true ending and is by far the best ending, since everything is so vague and up to interpretation. Pardon if I actually sounded excited about the endings, because I absolutely hate all of them. It felt way too convoluted for convoluted's sake. When I first quote-unquote finished the game, I got the alone ending by the way, I just felt an urge of anger rising inside me. After 5 hours of tedious time loop gameplay, this is what I'm rewarded with. Aside from the obviously terrible It's All a Dream ending, which I'll dive fully into later, I have two major issues with the ending. Firstly, the whole ending just doesn't feel earned. It came completely out of nowhere. There wasn't any real foreshadowing or clues found in the game itself to warrant the It's All just a dream ending. But I do want to mention that I really love the 10 minutes foreshadowing. It's kind of meta in a sense. The game title is 12 minutes. You constantly see in trailers, store page, promotional materials. But throughout the game, you're only interacting with 10 minutes of in-game time, which already got many players, including me, thinking about what happened in the 2 minutes that is clearly missing. I found this meta foreshadowing to be very clever in retrospect. However, I wish there were more direct clues in-game that suggest this could have been an imagination or a dream. Because of the fact that the ending itself is so convoluted and there was no foreshadowing at all, it left many people, including me, in a confused state. And this is where I would like to state my experiences with a few of the other games I played. Mainly Zero Escape, Virtue's Last Reward, and Ghost Trick Phantom Detective, which is actually surprisingly similar to 12 minutes, where you're interacting with different objects in a stipulated time loop to move the plot forward. Anyways, the reason why I'm citing this game is because when I got to the big revelations and endings, they were able to recontextualize everything I played so far. A lot of the strange occurrences or red herrings now have a deeper meaning behind it. The feeling you get is absolutely incredible. I remember when I finished playing Virtue's Last Reward at around 3 AM, I spent an additional 1 hour just scouring through different forums and playthroughs, looking at all the carefully constructed foreshadowing. It's an absolute feeling of delight. You felt rewarded in a sense. In 12 minutes however, instead of scouring for clues again, I had to watch a 27 minutes video explaining the dumb ending. The feeling of disappointment cannot be understated. The second issue I have is that not only does the game suffer from plot twist fatigue like I mentioned earlier, it also suffers from ending fatigue. Even after getting the alone ending, the game is still subtly telling you to continue the game even when there's really nothing of substance left. The endings felt extremely draggy, especially if you're like me and you didn't talk to your wife about the meditation book beforehand. So you gotta go back and click the book, and oh my god, I was thinking, can this game just end already?
It's only by forgetting that we ever...
Back to the It's All a Dream premise. It's an absolute cop-out explanation. Granted, it does explain many of the abnormalities and strange elements present in the main loop, such as drinking tap water and eating dessert for a special romantic dinner, the wife preparing baby clothes so early without even knowing whether it's a boy or a girl, dodgy evidence that is apparently very conclusive to be able to convince both the protagonist and the violent cop, and just weird furniture choices all around. I don't even know whether these weird elements are because it's all one big dream or it's just bad writing, but I'm leaning towards the latter. The worst offender is definitely the characterization like I mentioned earlier. None of the characters feel human at all. Let's talk about the wife first. She's by far the worst characterized character in this game. Some of her lines are just straight up weird. On one hand, she's a lovely wife and a very pleasant company that apparently likes meditation and stuff, and is also very aloof. For example, joking about you learning piano and stuff after she knows you are in a time loop. On the other hand, she's extremely short-tempered and will snap at you at multiple points of the game. For example, you can't eat first without her, you can't dig the ventilation grate in front of her, you can't inquire about her dad. Ultimately, she just feels like a plot device, existing simply to push the plot forward. This is clearly seen in her idle dialogues, her weak backstory involving her dad. Even her interest in meditation is just another plot point. And guess what? You know why her personality is so plain and one-dimensional? It's because it's all just a dream. She's not even real. Next up, the cop. He started out very interesting, an extremely violent cop that will take no prisoners and is just so absolute on his goals. He will track you down whether you lock the front door, hiding in the closet or the bathroom. And I gotta commend Willem Dafoe for voicing this character in such an intimidating fashion. But when you get to the line I mentioned earlier with the "I only listen to my mother and daughter," oh my god, the character just feels flat to me. It feels so cheesy that this tough, violent hitman, one weakness is his cancerous daughter. I simply can't take this guy seriously anymore. It's such a dumb, dramatic turn for this character. It's almost immersion breaking seeing him act this way. It feels so unnatural and fake. And you know why? It's because it's all just a dream. He's fake after all. He's just a manifestation of the dad in real life. Which brings me to the main protagonist, the husband. Even though I've given my criticism to the other characters for being uninteresting plot devices, ultimately it won't sting that bad if the main character is actually good. After all, due to the nature of time loop fiction, usually only the main character is able to traverse between each loop, retaining all the memories and knowledge. Thus, almost all of the character development and growth is predicated on this one character. For example, in one of my favourite visual novel and anime, Steins Gate, there's a point in the story where the main character has to constantly relive a series of events again and again. You can feel the emotions and urgency through the main character. The stakes are also very high because the previous chapters and episodes have already established what will be lost if Okabe fails his mission. And throughout the game, you can see how this series of events affected him and how much he has taken a toll on him and his psyche. His character development in the end felt so well earned. Another example, in Ghost Trick, you're constantly rewinding time in the gameplay to reach a certain outcome, most commonly to save someone from dying. But there's a very good reason why the protagonist is doing it. There's a time limit. If the main character is unable to solve the whole mystery by that night, he will never figure out the whole truth about his murder nor his identity. The character has innate motivation and is thus proactive and resourceful. And similarly, when the time has to come for the big reveal, you care so much more because you have seen firsthand all the struggles that led to this moment. The main character in 12 Minutes, however, doesn't really get any character development. He doesn't get too affected by the time loop, and there's practically no stakes at all. Even the paintings have more development than the main protagonist himself, which is just sad. One thing I noticed when I examine games with similar premise of doing the same events again and again is that most of the time loop mechanism is triggered by the main character himself in a very proactive manner. And usually the stakes tend to be higher since the main character has a clear purpose and intent with each loop or timeline, with each mistake not only costing the main character but also the world he inhabits. In 12 Minutes, the main character seems like just going through the motions since the time loop just happens organically. Once again, this is the one character that needs the character growth since it's the only one that can grow. And you can't use the same excuse that this is all just a dream. It's his dream. His character arc has to be established, and yet in this game it doesn't. There's basically no resolution or growth from him. Personally, I felt nothing for the guy, even doing scenes which are supposed to be emotional.
What else do I did everything right. I did everything right.
And aside from poor writing, another big part of the reason why the story sucks is due to Ludonarrative Disonnance, basically a disconnect between the narrative and gameplay. Throughout the game, you can be goofing around with different objects all the time despite all the tense situation. You can feel quite jarring as a result, especially since the game is treating the story and tone so seriously. One analogy I'll give is it's a low budget production theatre play where the plot and writing is just awful, and atop of that awful mystery plot, you have an actor that has gone rogue and will just do anything he wishes. It would just be a complete disaster from start to finish. I think the game would have felt way more in sync if the tone is more lighthearted and goofy. Alright, for the gameplay, I don't really want to delve into too much considering the length of the video. So firstly, for all the negatives I've already given the game, I gotta say there are certainly some bright parts of the game, mainly the process of finding out how to deal with the cop through electrocution. I'll say in my own personal playthrough, since I didn't do the closet loop first, I had to hide a knife on me so that I could cut off the handcuff after he got electrocuted. and I felt so clever at that moment. The other bright moment happens early on in the loop. We have to prove to the wife that I was in a time loop, and I clicked the window, though at that moment it didn't uncover any new insights since I didn't have the pocket watch, but I still felt clever nonetheless. Alright, now for the negatives. Why is the fast forward function so bad? It can only skip one line by one line, and for certain dialogues you can't even fast forward them. The ones that are the most irritating are the conversation between the cop and Bumblebee. I legit felt so tired of hearing the same conversation again and again. And why is there not an option to speed up the animations? It's so frustrating past the first hour to see the same animation play out in full. The game puzzles, like I said earlier, it was pretty grounded and it makes you feel smart for solving them until the part where your wife confessed. Everything from that point onwards is just handed to you on a silver platter. But yet you can still make certain mistakes that will require you to redo the loop again. The two very notable examples are when you preemptively take the Polaroid with you and you get punished by the game, and the other is when you didn't preemptively take the pocket watch, which of course gets you punished. It's just so stupid. My patience at those points were at their absolute limits. And the thing is, a lot of these problems can be solved with simple playtestings. The story being too convoluted should have been addressed in some ways. The gameplay woes are honestly inexcusable. And remember, in one of the interviews, the developer did mention something about playtesting, and the fact that he knows some of these problems existed but never acted on it. It really shows he wasn't willing to compromise on his vision. And you know what? I can't respect that to a certain extent. There are also of course many other minute issues that represent the lack of polish in this game, but the one issue I want to focus on is the audio mixing. I honestly can't tell whether the voice actors are even inspired to do the job. And there's so much talk about this being an all-star cast, but ultimately it felt completely flat in practice. Some of the voice direction is just straight up bad.
There's a picture of me the day he died. I was hundreds of miles away.
Show me.
On the fridge. Please, look.
And the way they are mixed in the final product, there's so many times where the tones of the line don't even match with the previous lines, nor the situation it is depicted in.
Let's do this.
Anyway, since 12 minutes itself is a pretty controversial game, I'd like to react to some of the more popular opinions out there from both sides of the equation before concluding this video. Okay, so this is a pretty popular hot take that I keep seeing. Many of y'all felt that the game has too many plot twists, and most of the twists are just there for so-called shock value. But I only agree to a certain extent. As the wife being the murderer and her end up not being the murderer after all, they aren't really twists. They are very much explicitly mentioned very early on in the game, as well as in many promotional materials. The only two real twists are you being the murderer slash half-brother, as well as the hypnosis therapy it's all a dream ending. I mentioned earlier that the game suffers from plot twist fatigue. That's not really that true. The problem with the execution is really the pacing. They happen way too fast from one another, especially the two plot points of the wife being the murderer and not being the murderer. I mean, it is a pretty common trope around mystery thriller games where the first suspect is usually not the correct one, so you can't really demerit the game in this case. But the pacing is the one that makes it really tiring since everything happens so fast in the last 20 minutes. As for the shock value comments like when in doubt, add incest, I really don't think that's the case. I used to write mystery stories myself, so sometimes we just get inspiration and we can't help ourselves. We tend to over-dramatize our works, adding stupid twists and explanation here and there. As for the writer and director of the game, you can tell he's at least very proud of his work, and one must take in mind that this took many years of development. So I don't believe the twists were added for shock value's sake. I believe it was a very calculated choice. Whether it has paid off, it is up to him to decide. Alright, the game is meant to be divisive. Then I gotta say it succeeded in spades. Till this day, 3 weeks after release, I'm still trying to wrap my head around people who actually enjoys the game. Maybe I'm just not smart enough. The game would have been better as a movie. I actually do not know about this. I still feel the plot is very weak, but at the same time, many people seem to agree that the execution is really the problem here. I can see some benefits, such as the 3 characters who have better and tighter characterization with no weird voice direction. And just being able to see their faces will add a lot more to the emotional moments and impact to the scenes. Another point is that if the game is not designed with a top-down perspective and maybe like a first-person perspective, I think it might have actually been better. Like the scene in the closet is my personal favourite quote-unquote cinematic moment in the game because it felt so tense. And seeing the lighting change between each loop in first person or VR could be really cool. The game is one big metaphor. If that's the case, maybe that's why the plot is bad. Because it's designed and written as a metaphor first and not conventional storytelling practices like creating compelling characters, good conflicts and resolution. But at the same time, there are games out there which represent one big metaphor and manage to deliver on it. So I don't know, man. Anyways, I did get some of the metaphoric elements or references like Bumblebee having cancer representing an incest kid. I even saw some Reddit posts about 5 stages of grief being represented, or the cop representing reality setting in on the dream. But yeah, honestly you can cram as many of these in, it still wouldn't make the story good in my opinion. The game should have ended with a peaceful cop scene. I have to strongly disagree with this take. If the game ended there, I would still be very disappointed. Though I'll say from that point onwards, there's nothing interesting in terms of gameplay, so from a gameplay perspective, I agree. This take directly links to the next comment. Does 12 minutes need to give a compelling reason why there's a time loop? I know this is subjective, but I feel it absolutely needs to give a reason why there's a time loop. A reason why I love thriller games or games with thriller elements like Danganronpa, Zero Escape, or even games like Bioshock is that they often have an underlying deeper plot running alongside the immediate plot line. So for games like Zero Escape and Danganronpa, the immediate plot line is surviving in the killing game. The deeper underlying plot points relate to the why are we trapped here, why must we be forced to participate. That's why for a thriller game like 12 minutes, I think it absolutely needs to give an explanation to why there's a time loop. Okay, this game is so unique, it's a piece of art, it's a masterpiece. Okay, first off, if you love the game, and you feel the game is in the 6, 7, 8, 9 or 10s, that's great, okay? I'm not here to invalidate your opinion, and nothing including this review should ever take away from your opinion, and I truly stand by that. I also understand that innovation is ultimately just lots of elements inspired from other games and mediums and repackaged into a new experience. But 12 minutes seriously has nothing of substance that is truly unique. Games that deal with the protagonist's real identity, games with a darker, mature theme, games that have point and click elements, encouraging different types of experimentation to get the job done, games with time loop elements, it all has been done multiple times. None of this is unique. The worst part about 12 minutes is that it takes the worst part of those elements, sometimes outright just botching the execution of those elements, ultimately making something so basic and not worth playing. And the fact that it's trying so hard to be art, it kind of become a little bit insulting to this medium that I love. It feels like 12 minutes trying to be bigger than video games instead of just embracing what can be achieved in an interactive medium. But yeah, that's just my opinion. To summarize, 12 minutes is an absolute disappointment. The story is straight up terrible with bad characterization and writing across the cast, especially when it comes down to the protagonist, which has underwhelming growth and development. It absolutely fails as a thriller game with an unsatisfying mystery that is too simplistic and convoluted at the same time, which is something I never even know is possible. The whole plot also doesn't deliver on the whole time loop narrative well, such a big missed opportunity squandered by a cop-out premise. The presentation is a letdown with a clear lack of polish in multiple areas despite being in development for so many years. The voice acting is also very uninspired and bland despite the all-star cast. The gameplay, while intriguing and fun at first, slowly becomes a nuisance with clunky controls, inflexible gameplay mechanics, and an extremely obtuse final puzzle. As such, I'm giving 12 minutes a 2 out of 10. It is literally the worst game I ever finished. I just want to quickly expand on that. It is not the worst game I played, but it's the worst game I ever finished. Usually if you don't like a game, you just stop playing, right? But I have to continue, because I really invested so much time to it, and it was such a disappointing mess at the end of the day. The best way to experience this game, in my opinion, is to play it with someone else or watch it on a stream with your favourite streamer. If there was ever any way for me to just forget that I played through this game and just be in Twitch chat watching Atriop or Moist Critical play it, I would absolutely do it. After all, it's only by forgetting that we really dropped the thread of time
and approach the experience of living in the present moment.
Anyway, that dumb quote aside, if you're looking for actually good compelling point and click mystery games, please go check out the Zero Escape series. And if you're looking for the same type of experimental point and click in a stipulated time frame type of gameplay with an amazing plot and twist, go check out Ghost Trick Phantom Detective on Nintendo DS. It is so sad that 12 minutes probably got more attention than those games ever did. Let me know your thoughts about 12 minutes in the comment section below. I'll try to answer all of them. So long guys, so long.